Welcome to the Ronald Wilsher show again. Um, we got a very cool guest. I don't want to say special because all the guests are special, then they're not special. So we got a cool dude named Mr. Jim Greene with HoustonCleanResponse.com. Welcome, Mr. Jim.
Thank you.
When I started this, my goal was to talk to cool people, and so you had to be on the list.
I
Uh,
was hoping I was going to make the list.
Well, I'll tell you something. I've got a lot of people right now wanting me to invite them on that I haven't. So, tell us a little bit. Number one, about you. I think we met at a networking group, didn't we,
We
over at
did.
Tomball?
We did. So, um, uh, mostly, I work in the real estate industry. I'm not a realtor. I'm not a loan officer. I don't do anything like that. Um, but what I do is I fix stinky houses mostly.
That
Um,
sounds fun.
it is. It's a lot of fun. But the bigger part of what we do is we're a biohazard cleanup company. We do crime scene cleanup, hoarder houses, things like that.
That actually sounds fun. I had one of my well, I still call him my brother-in-law. He's not married to my sister anymore, but he was a mortician.
Ah,
And he used to go and pick up bodies,
yep.
and so I guess you would come in after him, huh?
We come in after them. Yes. Yeah.
So, tell me this, first of all, where are you from?
I claim Houston as my home. Um, I have lived and been all over this country. I was technically, I literally, I was born in Louisiana, but was there for days. So, and then my dad got out of the Air Force and took his band on the road, and I lived on the road for the next 6 years in hotels.
So, we was talking earlier before we went live here, or, recording, we're not live, uh anyway, that and we'll talk about this, about you played in some bands and stuff, but I want to know, how did you get, because I used to be in the carpet cleaning business many years ago when I
Hmm.
was younger, but I never went into that area of cleaning. How did you get into this type of a business?
Well, um, I had for years. I toured with bands, and I owned sound company back in California because I did spend a lot of time out in California. And so
Jim, when you say California, you mean like West Texas?
No, I mean actual California, man. Yeah, I lived in Northern California for 12 years.
That's beautiful out there.
It was beautiful, but I really only missed the surfing and two people. So
You didn't leave a lot behind.
I did not, no sir. I pretty much left there the same way I arrived there, with the trunk of clothes and a guitar.
Well, and I want you to tell us about that too a little later. But so you came to Houston when?
I came back to Houston because I did grow up here. We eventually settled down here when I was a kid, and I grew up here. But I came back to Houston about 12 years ago, and I had decided I was going to start another sound company because I knew people here. I knew it wouldn't be a problem for me to get equipment set up and do all that again. Um, but when I had left Houston, there were a handful of sound companies, and especially good ones. When I came back, now there's 200, 300 different guys, all with these, huge sound systems, and they're all working for a couple of $100 a night. And I was just like, no, I don't want to work that hard for that kind of money anymore.
Well, it's kind of like people with podcasts. Everybody has podcasts now. So
Right, exactly. So it was, I needed to get myself, for me, um, somewhere along the line, I had learned that if you really want to do well for yourself, you either figure out a better way to do something that everybody wants done or needs done, or you do something that nobody else is willing to do.
right.
And I got into a business that nobody else is willing to do. So, or you gotta have the talent to do things that others can't do, and that was also in the sound industry for a long time, is there weren't a lot of people that expressed that talent. So, I really enjoyed that time in that industry, but it ran its course for me, and that was fine. Um, so I had decided, well, I had to do something else, and I really needed a new career. Well, I had a friend who owned a company called Clean Air Technology, or Clean Air, pardon me, and he was fixing stinky houses, and I just thought that that was interesting that he made his living by putting some machines or some chemicals in some houses and fixing them, and I really got to understand that when we ended up getting a house that somebody had smoked in for years, and he came and fixed it, and I was just blown away by that. And so for a couple of years, I just pawed around freelancing. I worked for my dad for a while, and I worked for some other guys, but I always was thinking about that process. And so finally, I got some money together and bought some machines and started advertising that I could do it.
And
I
so take us through for so you're saying mainly the people that use your service are real estate agents,
So we're referred by real estate agents to their clients to mostly fix a house that they want to sell.
right?
And then, but sometimes it's the buyer that's, they just made a deal to buy the house as is, and they need me to come in and fix it.
Yeah. So tell me, what does that, because it does sound, because I years and years ago I was in the carpet cleaning business. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier
Yeah,
when we were
yeah.
recording. And but I never got into that part of it, air duct cleaning and what you do. What does that, I mean, do you like seal the doors when you go in and let loose some stuff? How does that process work?
So we generally don't seal houses. Most, especially newer houses, houses that are built in the last 10 years, which is a lot of Houston now.
Right?
Um, those houses are sealed up tight, because they're built to these new standards to keep them energy efficient.
Right?
Um, that in itself is a problem because of mold, which we could get into at a later time if you wanted to. But the houses are pretty well sealed up, so we don't actually have to seal anything in order for our process to work.
So do you just go in and you let it sprays, or what do you let
So,
loose?
well, it all depends on the problem that we're working on. So, our number one call is cigarette smoke. Always, because people still smoke in their houses. I don't get it, that they
I don't get that they smoke, much less in their house, but hey,
right.
if that's what they wanna do. So what do you do when you go in there? Do you have something like machines or
Well, for a long time, people used ozone machines for that kind of thing, but we use another chemical called chlorine dioxide. It was discovered in the 1760s,
Oh,
um, probably by a Frenchman, I think. Um, but they started using it in the mid 1800s in the United States in the stockyards, and mostly to keep the odor down. But they also discovered that, or pardon me, it was mostly to keep disease from spreading between the cattle. Um, but they also discovered that it also kept the odor down in the stockyard as well. And what we do with it now is, rather than dispersing it in a liquid, is we off gas it in the house. So it's almost similar to tinting a house for termites, but without the tent and without the termites.
so how long does that take?
About a day. It's we tell people it's an overnight process. It runs about 16 hours.
And then you're done and, they
If
come
it's
in
a
like
heavy smokehouse, then we've got to do it twice. We'll do true treatments 2 days in a row, right back to back, and then and at that you come in that third day afterwards, you'll never know that anybody ever smoked in there.
nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
Well, it's, that's cool. So what I wanna also do is get into a little bit of your background. You told me you used to play in a band. I wanna hear about that.
Well, I never played in a big band or anything like that, but I did tour with a lot of bands. I've been a sound engineer, a monitor engineer, and a guitar tech. So I've spent some time with some people, had a lot of fun. Um, one of my first ones was right after I had gotten married and moved out to California. This is my first wife. I got a call from Rudy Sarzo one day from Quiet Riot. And I was just like, he's like, "Hey, we're getting ready. We're going to do 13 weeks with Aerosmith, and I need a bass tech. And I hear that you're really good." And I was like, "Well, how did you hear this?"
I am.
I'm like, well, I think I'm pretty good, but I said, "Who'd you hear about me from?" And he goes, "Oh, this guy, Tony B." And I was just like, "Tony B? Wait, I just met that guy 2 days ago."
You must have impressed them.
you know, well, Tony B was the kind of guy that you couldn't. I mean, everything that came out of his mouth it sounded like total BS. He was a name dropper, and it all sounded like BS, and it turned out that everything he said was true. He he
He was
took
just
me
laying down the facts, huh?
he took me to Eddie Van Halen's house one day
I love that.
in a Ferrari.
Well,
So
I was talking to somebody the other day, and they told me something about some star they met. I don't even remember, but I'm like, "Don't you wish we would have had cameras back then that where you take pictures of everything now? It would have been
right.
cool to take pictures, you know?"
Yes. Yeah, no, yeah, there were no, it's brick phones. That was what we had back
Yeah,
then, man.
no cameras on them. So, Jim, would you have been classified as a roadie, or was that different as with the
A
band?
roadie technically is well, I classify myself as a roadie. Um, I personally, for me, if you're any part of the production whatsoever, other than the band, you're a roadie.
Okay.
You're on the road with everybody else. You're in show black. You wear black t-shirts, you wear black shirt, black pants, black socks, black shoes. It's your wardrobe 24/7. Most of the guys have black pajamas, I think.
So, when
So,
was this, like, in the '80s, '90s?
no, this was through the into the late '90s is when this started. So that was when I got that first call was '97.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and then I ended up, I was out with, I did KC and the Sunshine Band,
Oh, wow.
Tower of Power. I did some stuff with Pantera on the Black Sabbath reunion tour. So it's I did a lot of interesting stuff. I almost played bass at the Fillmore one night.
Almost.
Almost. I was an artist relations guy for Gallion Kruger for bass amps for a while, and Susan Tedeschi had their bass player wanted to try our new amplifier, and so I brought it up there for a show. Well, he didn't make it in time for sound check. And so she asked me if I would play bass for the sound check. And I was like, "Well, I don't really know your music." And she just looks at me and goes, "Honey, it's the blues." She goes, "I'll call the key." And I'm like, "All right." So we did that. And then the bass player still he had missed his plane apparently. And so when that happened, she was in a panic. And so it was 5 or 10 minutes before the show, and she's like, "Hey, do you think you could play the show with us? You handled the sound check pretty well." And I was just like, "I don't know your set." And she looked at me again. She just goes, "Honey, it's the blues."
You didn't hear me the first time?
So, and then about 5 minutes later, he walked in, and
So,
so
what town was this?
that was San Francisco. That was the
Oh,
Fillmore.
wow.
Yeah.
The city by the bay.
Yep. So
So,
no, I
you
I was living in San Jose, and that's where GK was at the time, and that's where I had moved out there for my first wife.
well, I tell people I went to, California twice, once by mistake, but, we were traveling back from Arizona one time, me and my brother and my dad, and, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and we look up, and there's a sign that said, "Welcome to California," and we were coming back to Texas. I was like, "I think we need to turn around." But the other time I went, we actually stayed, me and the mother of my son, we stayed in the St. Francis Hotel, overlooking, Union Square and
I've
looked
done a
at
lot of shows at the St. Francis.
yeah. It was beautiful out there, and we went, across the bridge. We went to, we saw the prison. We were
Mhm.
actually gonna take a tour, and it was a week and a half wait to get into the prison,
Alcatraz?
Alcatraz. And so I'm like, you wonder if you'd have told those guys back in the '50s and '60s, there'll come a time in the not too distant future when people are waiting for a week and a half to get in here. They probably wouldn't have believed you because
Yeah,
all rumors.
I think they had a much shorter wait to get into Folsom, though.
Yeah, yeah. That was Merle Haggard's prison.
Yeah, yep,
M. Ronald Haggard. So
yep.
you
I did
mentioned
a
some.
few shows at Folsom too.
Oh, wow. Because that's where Johnny Cash did the show that
Yep,
Merle Haggard was in the audience.
yep.
Tell us, you mentioned something about earlier when we were talking about ZZ Top. Tell us that story.
Oh, well, the first time I met Billy Gibbons, actually, I sold him a cappuccino maker.
Oh, wow. Where was this at?
My first job, it was 1992. It was my first job out of the Marine Corps. My mom was working at Macy's at the Galleria,
Okay.
and she got me a job working in the housewares department, which I love because I love to cook. And so I got to learn all about all these different types of cookware that we sold, very high end cookware, and I loved it. And so one day I was coming back out of the break room, and you had to pass by a security check before you went back out on the floor. And so passing by, and I hear, "Oh my God, it is him!" And I look in the security office, and there on the screen, Billy Gibbons is coming in on the first floor, and so I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And they're like, "Leave him alone. Just go back to your work." Like, no problem. Well, there was this gal that worked. I was heading back to my department, and the department next to us was domestics, the one that did pillows and sheets and bedding and all that kind of stuff. And there was this gal, and I cannot remember her name, but she was a big old black gal, and she looked like Della Reese. And she carried herself like Della Reese. And so she always, I just always called her Della. Anyway, she goes, "Hey, Jim, Billy Gibbons is downstairs." I said, "I know," but security said don't bother him or anything. She's like, "Screw those guys." And so I was like, whatever. So I go back to my department, and 5 minutes later, I hear Jim, and I poke my head around a corner, and she's got Billy by the arm, and I'm just like, "What are you doing?" And he looks at me, and he goes, "Hey, I need to buy a cappuccino maker." And I'm like, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah, yeah." Well, apparently that was he would buy 3 or 4 of these a year, and that was his favorite gift to give to people. And so that was the first time I met him. And then after that, I got a job, my dream job, working at Guitar Center. The Guitar Center had just come to Houston, and I wanted to work at Guitar Center. I wanted to be in the music business. And so I got a job there, and Billy would come in a lot. And the first thing he'd do is he'd go to the break room, and if there was an unopened Coke in the refrigerator, he'd take it and leave at least a $5 bill. And if he didn't have a 5, he'd leave a 20 or something with a note that said thank you. And so, but he'd come in, we just let him have free reign of the store. And one of the cool things is what we would do is if he wanted to borrow anything, we would loan it to him. You just take it. And when you bring it back, please autograph it, and we would sell it at full retail or more and make a boatload of money off it. So we just, he'd borrow amplifiers, and we did the same thing with King's X as well, because those guys were always needed equipment for recording as well. And so ZZ Top's not so awesome album, in some people's opinion, Antenna, was recorded almost entirely of stuff he borrowed from the Guitar Center there. So, and one of my buddies had turned him on to a new pedal, which he also used on that album, and I think it's one of his, yeah, a staple of his tone now ever since then. So
Well,
yeah,
it's
Billy's a funny guy. He's one of the sweethearts of the industry. You hear about people that aren't very nice. Billy's one of the sweethearts.
well, I probably shouldn't admit this, being a Texan and from being from Texas, but ZZ Top, I know every girl's crazy about a sharp, but that's about all I know. So I'm guessing Billy Gibbons is the one with the beard in ZZ Top, right?
Oh, one of the guys with the beard, yes. So, now, since Dusty passed away, Elwood has become their bass player, and Elwood was Billy's tech forever. And Elwood would come into the store all the time, half the time bitching about Billy.
Well,
You know?
it's funny when the reason I started this podcast, and I still am admitting I don't know what the hell I'm doing other than just sitting there talking, but I love stories like this because, I always tell people life's about starting conversations and
Yep.
life's about stories, and I think it's part of your responsibility and contribution to posterity is tell the stories, because now we'll record this and maybe somebody will get some good out of it later on, long after we're gone, and it bring a smile to their face. So,
Well,
I never
hopefully we
knew
say
really
something
that from the
wise
time
then.
I'm sorry?
I said, "Hopefully we say something wise then."
Well, I'm not really worried about that, but, no, when I met you, like I say, I've always liked you ever since I met you. We haven't you sponsored one of my classes one time, but it's the other I just always liked you, and I thought, "Man, if I have a podcast, I'm gonna invite him on." And so, I want you to tell me something, Jim, that I don't know. Nobody knows about you that you don't tell a lot of people, but it has nothing to do with your work now. Something like a skill you have. You mentioned cooking. I didn't know you like to cook.
Man, I love to cook. I love to smoke meat. I don't get much of a chance to smoke meat anymore, but I love to barbecue and smoke meats.
Well, I'm gonna have to introduce you to Mr. Craig Carter with Remax, Ruben and Nancy Villarreal's office over in Spring. I think that's where it's at. He's the same way. He loves that barbecue. I bet
Yeah.
y'all would get along really well.
When I first started the business, and I figured out that the best way to get to know realtors was to feed them, or give them free booze. Um, I didn't have I mean, I had nothing really when I started this business, and, um, the only thing I could do was I couldn't afford to cater to have some catered lunch come in, so I brought in my smoked meats, and I fed them barbecue that I cooked at home, and everybody loved it, and
So
I
what
just
what is
started.
your secret? I know some people. Well, actually, I don't know if you met him, Jim, over at Network Tombow when you used to go over there. Do you remember Brian? He was a Apple tech guy, and then there was
Yeah,
Stan Milliken, and we used to go over to the barbecue place
yeah,
around the corner there in
yep,
Tomball that got put in Texas Monthly.
yeah.
So, what's a good barbecue, and how did I asked Stan this one time and Brian, because 'cause I'm not a real big meat eater, but, I mean, I'll occasionally eat some beef or barbecue, but what makes yours different?
What I got known for was my pulled pork, and I think what made the difference is I cook it for, like, 16 hours. So I'd smoke it for I have my own rub, which I developed, and I would let it sit in the rub overnight, and then I would put it on the smoker the next day, and it would stay on the smoker for 8 hours. And then I'd pull it off the smoker, and I put it in a deep pan, and I pour a real sugar Dr. Pepper over it,
Oh, wow.
and then cover it in a foil, and I put it in the oven at 200 degrees for another 8 hours. And then you open that thing up, and you just pull that bone right out, and you just kinda give it a little tap, and it just falls apart, man.
Well,
It's
see, I love stories like this and things like this because, I like people that get excited over whatever it is they're doing,
Mhm.
whatever it is, right? So that's a pretty cool story. Then I never knew that you like to cook. Tell us
I lo
something else about you, Jim, that you don't really talk about a lot, but that you like to do that somebody would think, oh, that's unusual. Can you think of anything like that?
Yeah, I got something that I and it's something I should probably talk about more, though. Man, I love going to church. I love my church
Seriously?
family. Yes, I love my church family. They have been a huge part of my life for the last 7 years, and or 6 years, and I just absolutely love it.
Well, you gotta tell us who it is and give them a plug.
Yeah, well, it's New Church in Katy. All summer, this summer, we're going to be meeting at Griffin Elementary. And this Sunday, actually, we're having a big barbecue, and it's
Mentioning.
free.
So
So,
so why do you is it just came around along at the right time in your life, or what's your reason for liking it so much?
well, my pastor and I have been friends actually for nearly 30 years.
Oh, wow.
So he had a band called Atomic Opera, and I basically took care of his musical needs at Guitar Center. Um, and so, we drifted apart over the years, and then a few years ago, I was at a time in my life when I needed to make some major changes, or I was probably going to die. Um, and I called him up, and I was like, "Hey, man, I need some help, brother." and he's like, "Well, hey, man, why don't you come to church this Sunday? I just started this church." And I was like, "Oh, cool, all right." And so I went and started going to church at his place, and it's made one of the biggest differences in my life. And all the guys at the church are my friends. We meet weekly outside of the church a lot, and so that's a big thing for me. And yeah, enough people don't know about that.
Well, I've always said I have in my book, I don't have one in front of me, but people would rather see a sermon any day than hear one,
Yeah,
and who you are is so loud, I can't hear what you're saying. And, a guy said one time, yeah, he said, I'm going to go out and my main goal is to spread the gospel. And if necessary, I'm even going to talk.
right.
And so, I think who you are says a lot about you. And like to say, I think when I met you, I didn't, we didn't know each other and we haven't talked in a while, but there was something about you that I liked. And so I'm glad you came on here. I'm glad uh that I got to know you a little better. Like I say, I mainly started this podcast because I like talking and I like talking to people and I like hearing their story. I have in my book it said everything in life has a story and a price. You
Yep.
know, and you look at all the decisions you've made in your life, and it couldn't have been that bad because what happened? It got you to here,
Yep.
did something right. And so I think one of the things that we don't do enough of is we don't give ourselves enough credit, you know, because
Oh, absolutely, and I am that way. For most people, we're our own worst critics, but I'm certainly harder on myself than anybody else is.
yeah, and I don't think that's I think you hold yourself to a certain standard, but like I say, I think you should give yourself credit and count your blessings. You've done a lot right, and obviously, or you wouldn't be sitting here. We're currently right now breathing some of the air that some of the greatest people in the history of the world they could only dream about. We're sitting there breathing that air,
Yep.
right? And so a lot of good things that have happened to get us to here. So, but well, is there anything else you want us to know before we wrap this up? And tell everybody again how to get a hold of you if somebody wanted to talk to you. Let's say they bought a house and it has some need of your service. How would they get a hold of you?
Well, you can reach me at 713-303-9393.
Going across the bottom of the screen there.
Yep. And we'll be happy to come out and take a look at what you got going on, and we can even get it taken care of right away while we're there if you want to. It doesn't matter the problem is. If it's disgusting and nasty to you, we can fix it.
That's why they're
Uh,
calling you, right?
yeah, exactly. Whether it has to do with the death of somebody or the death of an animal in a house, or hoarding or any smelly situation, we can fix it right away for you.
So, have
Um,
you ever I was gonna ask you earlier, have you ever showed up, Jim, to a house that actually still had the bodies in it?
Only of animals.
Oh, okay. No humans.
No, so I did take a crime scene. So when I decided that we were going to get into the crime scene cleanup part, I took a crime scene cleanup course out of Dallas. It was an 80-hour course,
Wow.
And I went for the full boat. I wanted all the classes, and so I did the full thing. And he told us that he'd been called to scenes and gotten there before the coroner did. Now, this is in Dallas, so maybe that's true. But generally, we never, I mean, I haven't gotten a call until after the police have cleared the scene.
Yeah. That's generally the protocol, right?
It is, yes. So now we've been on the scenes and had to stop what we're doing, and I've had to call the police back out and come pick up some what we thought was evidence.
Yeah.
So because they had a guy, we did one. It was when that freeze hit. They thought the guy died of natural causes. Well, I moved the couch that he died on and found a 308 casing behind it.
It was a natural bullet.
Yeah, it was a natural bullet, and they didn't find a gun, so it ended up being what a suspected murder, and
Wow.
instead of a death by natural causes, he was shot in the head, but because of how long it took him to find it, that the wound had kind of closed over, so they didn't see the bullet hole.
So you were part of a CSI.
Yes, kind of, yeah.
Well,
That was
listen, brother, I appreciate you coming on. For all my Realtor friends, I know quite a few of those people. I do CE classes for them.
I do.
If you need somebody that knows what the heck they're doing, Mr. Jim is your guy. I appreciate you coming on, and once I figure out what we're doing, maybe I'll have to have you back.
Oh, that'd be great, man. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and we'll see you next time. My name's Ronnie. If you want to call or text me, I'll put some information down in the what do you call it, description. We'll put some links down there, and I'll put Houston Clean Response. I'll put that down there. So thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you again, Mr. Jim.
Thank you so much for having me on.
All righty. Bye bye.
Bye bye.